Hello everyone and welcome to Geography 14, Cartographic Design, and welcome to our first lecture, the history of cartography. In this lecture, I'm going to go over some information about the course as we get started, and I will also cover the history of cartography, focusing on a series of maps. Before I continue, I just want to talk about a few things about the course, and then we will cover ancient cartography, maps of the Renaissance, and early thematic maps. These lectures will be broken down into 3 smaller lectures so that they are easier to watch and follow along. As part of the first week of this online course, I would also like you to participate in the icebreaker discussion and to also finish Module 0 quiz. Chapter 1 of the reading is already uploaded, and there will also be a Review Lab 1 and a Module 1 quiz as well. First thing I want to mention are the course student learning outcomes. After completing this course, students should be able to demonstrate an appropriate fluency of basic cartographic design concepts. You should also be able to demonstrate the ability to determine the most ethical and appropriate procedure for a specific cartographic design question. And lastly, you should be able to demonstrate the ability to effectively communicate through the design or preparation of visual representations of data in different formats. I know this sounds like a lot, but you will acquire the skills to be able to design maps that communicate data accurately, correctly, and following ethical and best practices in design as well. Throughout this course, we are going to reinforce your skills and apply design principles around color, typography, for example, as well as balance on the page. You should be able to create and edit effective visual representations of data throughout the course, and you will also gain experience for appropriate industry employment or transfer goals. And we are going to do this through exercises in GIS, as well as assignments in cartographic history and theory. I want to briefly remind you that we are using a required textbook for this course. I have provided several links to it in the module. Chapter 1 is already available. You can begin reading it now. We will begin discussing it next week. There is also an ebook option, which is affordable. You can also look for the book as used, but I recommend that you get a hard copy. However, the ebook option also works. I personally prefer a hard copy, which is, I think, easier to consult. Regardless, I recommend that you purchase this book, especially if you plan to be in the GIS field as part of your career. It will really be a reference source that you're going to find useful throughout your map making activities. So entering into our field, this course is on cartographic design and we're going to focus on maps. We should remember that maps are symbolic depictions emphasizing relationships, and these are tools to convey information. We should think of a map as making an argument or conveying a story, and the different elements of that map coming together to support that argument or to tell that story. Cartography is traditionally understood as the science and practice of drawing maps. It comes from the Greek kartes graphian, which means to write on paper, and it is a method of representation and abstraction. Remember that maps are a medium of communication, and they are a powerful way to convey information because we use them to relate to our world. They can become, for example, legal documents in land claims, or they can also become documents in city hall meetings discussing potential plans to redevelop a neighborhood or to expand transportation routes in a bus or a metro system, for example. Maps are also objects. They are beautiful, they are interesting, they can have historic value as well as artistic value, and maps are often parts of broad research projects as well because they can allow us to look into the past or how people from the past interpreted their world by looking at historic maps, and we're going to be doing some of that here. Overall, however, I want you to have a good relationship with maps and cartography. I think that this is one of the best courses in GIS that I have ever taught. I really like this course and this topic of cartography, and I hope that you come out of it very passionate about atlases, maps, and cartographic design as well. Okay, beginning with the history of cartography, we continue finding maps or caves where maps were created. For example, a new discovery in 1993 was found in a cave in northern Spain, and we date this as the oldest map at 14,000 years old. And this is a map that was found etched in a cave with a relief, and we can identify different aspects of the terrain of the surroundings of the cave where this map was found as well. One of the oldest maps before that we had found was a wall painting in Turkey, in what is modern day Turkey, in the village of Çatalhöyük. This is a map dated from 6200 before the Common Era. So not as old as the previous one, but still quite old. And as you can see in the image here on the right, this is a map that has been carved into the walls of a cave, and it depicts a volcano with an eruption. And through successive research on this area, we have found that indeed this map on the wall, carved into the wall of this cave, does correspond to this village here in central Greece, and the mountains and the volcanoes that are present in the area also confirm this Neolithic site. Moving into other forms of cartography, for the most part, ancient cartographic history is inconsistent. It is very difficult to trace connections between maps because maps are often lost or destroyed through time. Many maps, for example, were created in papyrus paper, which decomposes. After it dries, it breaks up. Paper and wood also caught fire, and this is what has led to the loss of many records from previous historical eras. Clay can also become easily broken. For example, the Gasser map here of 2300 before the Common Era. And any bronze maps often also get melted down and reappropriated. What we often find are reconstructions of ancient maps. However, these reconstructions are suspect because monks who copied graphically these reconstructions, they copied them with little information of what they were copying. Many of these monks were in monasteries, for example, where they brought in books and translations from other parts of the world, and they would copy them and recreate them, but without having visited these parts. So a lot of these reconstructions are vague. They come from manuscripts, and often they also have exaggerated poetic language and are not necessarily as accurate. Some of the most accurate ancient maps we do have are these from the Babylonian period. This is the Babylonian world map, dated to about 600 before the Common Era. And this is a small-scale map of the known world at the time, which depicts, for example, Babylon and surrounding cities, as well as oceans. You see Babylon and the Euphrates River along with an encircling ocean, and this theme is going to repeat itself in other maps. And they also have, this map also has the 4 directions of the wind, and it also has an accompanying text which describes the map. So that is very useful. In ancient Egypt, we are also going to find maps, especially for surveying land. Annual flooding of the Nile also needed to reestablish boundaries of properties. So many of these maps were used for taxation. They are written in about the 4th millennium before the Common Era. The Egyptians also had advanced mathematics, large agricultural production, and they also ventured into art, medicine, architecture, and quarrying. So many of the maps from this period cover these topics. However, they didn't leave many, or rather many of their maps don't exist into the present because they used papyrus paper, or they also use wood to carve these. This is an example of the Turin papyrus. It's a papyrus from Egypt dated to the year 1300 before the Common Era. It is kept in Turin, Italy, and it is also known as the map of the gold mines. It is a topographic map between the Nile and the Red Sea, and it depicts a route to several gold mines. It also has two legends, so it is easy to identify and to read. But very few of maps from ancient Egypt survive. Moving forward into the Greek world, we have many contributions from figures in Greek philosophy and history and science. For example, Thales of Miletus, Anaximander, Pythagoras, Hecataeus. These are some of the first philosophers and scholars of the Greek world that record mapped information based on the travels of sailors. They also begin to propose a spherical world, and they produce the first book of geography. The picture of this map of the world here is known as a mappa mundi, or world map, and it is a traditional old world depiction of the world surrounded again by that ocean circle, but we only see 3 continents because this is the known world up until this point in history. This is known as Anaximander's approximation of the world. We believe that this is what it would have looked like. We don't have a picture of the original. Later on, other figures in the Greek world like Aristotle, Eratosthenes, and Ptolemy are going to make additions and expansions to our knowledge of geography. But Claudius Ptolemy of the Roman period created this map of the world in the year 150 of the Common Era. So we are now within the Common Era. This is a map of the world with mountain chains, and we also see the winds personified as these figures of persons. We also see mountain ranges depicted, and for the first time we're going to see Ptolemy use a graticule along with a projection. This is the first projection for the northern hemisphere, and this is a projection that Ptolemy has applied to this world map, and it is an attempt to measure from equinoxial parallels, for example, to try to understand distances, but many of these maps were not really for navigation. We also have Chinese cartography, especially the height of ancient or older Chinese cartography is from the Song and the Han Dynasty periods. For example, the Gong is a script representing early Chinese geographic writing. Pei Xiu is considered one of China's greatest cartographers. His book, The Tracks of Yu, depicts this map in great detail of eastern China. And here we can clearly see the Yangtze River and the Yellow River. In China, we used, at this point in history, we used the li as a unit of measurement. And as you can see, these maps are quite accurate. These maps were kept for land management, but also for management within the government, as well as water projects, canals, etc. I want to briefly just look at pre-Hispanic cartography in the Americas for a little bit. We don't have a lot of records that have survived before the Spanish conquest, because part of the mission of the Spanish was actually to destroy the knowledge that the Aztecs had in order to create a whole new world and a whole new way of looking at the world. A lot of the maps or books or codexes of the Aztecs, for example, were destroyed by Catholic priests who often thought that many of these books depicted witchcraft, for example, or types of sorcery. And so we don't have books surviving from pre-Hispanic cartography. This is the earliest that we get, and I'm actually mistaken to write the title as pre-Hispanic, because at this point, the Mexica Empire, the Aztecs, the Aztec Empire of the ethnic Mexicas, they lasted from 1250 to 1520, when the Spanish take over the capital city of Tenochtitlan. So 3 years after the capture, Hernan Cortés sends a series of letters to to Spain, and among those letters there are also included these maps of the Gulf of California, as well as the city of Tenochtitlan as it would have existed in the 1520s. This is a map that was reprinted in Nuremberg, Germany, and it's contained today within the Newberry Library in Chicago, Illinois. The Mexica had a system of measurement, especially for urban planning. They used a Tlalcoahuitl, which is equivalent to about 2.5 meters. And it was used because agricultural production was managed through measurement as well. But many of the maps of the Aztecs often revolved in a circular theme, and we also see physical geography depicted and drawn in the style of these styles of maps. The Mayans also had complex cartography. We don't really know much of it besides wall paintings, for example, but they also had developed complex mathematics and astronomy. They even had an observatory in Chichen Itza, for example, as early as 906 AD. So this is another example of a Mexica Aztec codex. The codexes were written on hide, for example, or also papyrus. The Codex Quetzalcoatlin is in the Library of Congress, and it is from 1593. So these are some of the earliest maps that we have of the period. They are not necessarily pre-Hispanic, but they still bear the influence of Aztec cartography. But we begin to see infrastructure like a church, for example, right? But we keep the style of tracing a lineage from one clan to another by depicting ancestors, for example, by depicting mountains, hills, etc. And many of the codices of the Aztec period, for example, continue to use many of the same symbology, even in maps that were being sent to Europe. For example, hills are depicted with these structures. Water also is quite recognizable within codices, Aztec codices, and we also have caves and stones, for example. And this is a detail from the book, The History of Cartography, in the chapter on Mesoamerican cartography. Going back to Europe, in the Middle Ages, after the collapse of the Roman Empire, Europe goes through a period where superstition was more important than science. The Christian church definitely had a big influence in the type of research that was carried out, and it influenced the view of the world. So early maps of the Middle Ages are going to have a religious influence. They are often going to depict heaven, hell, or they're going to have biblical references. For example, the map of the world of Anaximander that was divided into 3 continents persists up until the Middle Ages. And this is again a map of the known world. So this is a mappa mundi, or a T and O map, because the rivers resemble a T and the oceans resemble an O. We have, for example, Asia, Africa, and Europe. And we have 3 bodies of water that divide the world into a T and O. And within these medieval maps, again, we see a heavy presence of religious iconography, but we also see that they center the center of the world in the city of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was a very important city for Christians, for example. We also see the Red Sea pictured here in red, and somewhere in what would be today Iraq, around the Euphrates or the Tigris River, we also see a scene of paradise where we find Adam and Eve, for example, at the top of this map. We're also going to begin to see animals here at the bottom of the map as well. And so most of these maps, again, are trying to convey a moral. They're trying to convey a story. For example, In some of the maps, we would find stories of Whale Island, like the story of St. Brendan, who brought Irish apostles. And this is a navigational tale that is supposed to tell sailors to be careful for large ocean creatures that might seem like islands, but they are actually whales, for example. But in cartography, many of these maps were supposed to retell miracles, but they are more than anything a way to dissuade explorers. The phrase, for example, "here be dragons," which is used in some cartography, was a way to dissuade explorers or sailors from exploring areas that did not belong to them. Today, the phrase "here be dragons" is used in programming to warn someone that a code works, but they're not really sure how the code works. And so if you're going to ever have to edit something like that, you need to, it's like a warning that you're proceeding into an area that is uncharted territory or hasn't been figured out yet. So this is the same thing that the phrase expressed in cartography. It was a warning. Another element that we're going to find in the maps of the Middle Ages, especially navigational maps with oceans, are medieval bestiaries. Within the ancient Roman and Greek traditions, it was believed that land animals had their counterpart in the ocean, in the water. And so we're going to see, for example, mermen. We're also going to find a sea pig, and we also have sea eagles, for example. And so it is very common to see these types of beasts that are more than anything speculations. Later on, we begin to see a revival of scientific cartography in Europe, especially in the Mediterranean region. While Europe is going through the Middle Ages governed by superstition, in the Muslim world of the southern half of the Mediterranean, we see what is known as the Islamic Golden Age, which thrives in part by translating ancient Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Roman texts into Arabic, and then distilling whatever knowledge was had in those texts. Among some of these figures, we have Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta was a lawyer in Islamic law, and he was also a traveler who wrote a lot about the known world, one of the first geographers to write about different parts of the world. He traveled from North Africa to the Middle East to East Africa, all the way to Asia as well. But one of the greatest is Muhammad al-Idrisi. Muhammad al-Idrisi, I have a goat here because he's the greatest of all time in terms of Islamic cartography. He built up on Ptolemy's map of the world, and he also developed and improved on Anaximander's Mappa Mundi that later on became the base of the TNO. So here we have the same map, but with several expansions and more details. And this is a reproduction of the book of the world by Muhammad al-Idrisi, and this is an atlas with a lot of detail. We have symbology representing mountains, representing trees, as well as cities, even islands and volcanoes as well. And Muhammad al-Idrisi lived in Palermo in Sicily at this point in history, and by interviewing sailors, he was able to gather a lot of knowledge about the known world at the time. By 1450, this is one of the last detailed maps that we have. Again, it continues to employ this three-continent world where we see Europe now more finely drawn, and Africa. However, Africa's Atlantic coast remains speculative, and so does Asia and the northern hemisphere. But we are already seeing the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea as well, and this is the Fra Maura map, which was developed based on Marco Polo's writings in the year 1450. And this is the hemisphere that it depicts. However, by 1502, we start seeing the early discoveries of the Americas. We see this is Alberto Cantino's planisphere. This map was created for Portugal, for the Kingdom of Portugal after explorations in the New World. And this book, this map was later stolen and smuggled out to Italy, because in the 1500s they're talking about empires competing with each other for routes to the Silk Road routes in Asia, in India as well, for the spice trade. But the Europeans stumble on this new continent, and so they're trying to figure it out. And at this point, this is where we have, for example, Caribbean islands and what I speculate is the coast of South America and Brazil as well, clearly named. We also see the different kingdoms where Europeans, especially the Portuguese, had established trading relationships here, especially with the kingdom of the Congo and the castle at Elmina. The Portuguese are also going to develop colonies and trading posts in India and Southeast Asia. By 1507, we see the Waldseemuller map is the first map to finally identify a new continent. And this was named after Amerigo Vespucci, because Amerigo Vespucci was an Italian writer and cartographer who was talking a lot at the time about these new lands that had been discovered in the Western Atlantic. But Amerigo Vespucci was the first one to put all the information together and to argue that the Europeans had not found a shorter trading route to Asia, but that they had stumbled on a new continent. And the map by Martin Waldseemuller, the 1507 map, is the first one to depict the Americas as a new continent. And Martin Waldseemuller also names this continent as America, following the tradition of naming continents in the feminine, like Europa, Africa, and Asia. So we continue with America for the new continent, now being depicted in these world maps. Martin Waldseemuller also places Amerigo Vespucci here at the top of the map alongside Claudius Ptolemy. Claudius Ptolemy had given us an accurate map of the known world at his point in 150 of the Common Era. And so Amerigo Vespucci is pictured here with this map of this hemisphere. However, it still remains unfinished. Of course, as you can see, there's a lot of speculation as to what is on the other side of this new continent. But this is the first map to have the name America, and this is a map, this reproduction or rather a reproduction of this map was bought by the Library of Congress, and it is kept in Congress, in the Library of Congress, and displayed there as the birth certificate, in a sense, of the Americas. I want to just show you this Icelandic Commonwealth map by Abraham Ortelius. Ortelius was a well-known cartographer, but here we believe that in this Commonwealth of Iceland, he had been tasked with depicting all of these different beasts to create a territory that was threatening. Remember, there were some countries that did not want other traders or sailors to go or maybe even invade, and so they often exaggerated the bestiaries as a way to dissuade anybody from venturing into their territories, or so that they would not have to compete with others for fisheries, etc. But this is a wealth of information and speculation for this time. Quite a lot of imaginary animals. Okay, that's the end for this part. Thanks very much. In the second section, we will continue with maps from the Renaissance.